Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, your host of the Grid Mod Pod and Vice President of Technical Strategy at AEIC. On today's episode, I discuss workforce development, talent pathways, and the future of utility recruiting with Laticia Holbert of ComEd. This issue is important because the utility industry cannot modernize the grid without modernizing how it attracts, prepares, and supports the next generation of workers. As workforce needs evolve, utilities must think beyond traditional hiring models and create more intentional pathways for people to enter the industry, build the skills, and see a future for themselves in this work. This is a passion of mine. So programs like Power Up Academy show what is possible, and I'm very excited for you to hear about this journey. We'll talk about what is essential, how partnerships with community organizations are a must, and really what the Academy is teaching about access and participant success. We hope you walk away from this episode with the insights and momentum needed to spark change in our industry. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz. Again, Laticia Holbert. I am the Senior Manager of Workforce Development for ComEd. I've been here almost 6 years, exciting 6 years, and lead the workforce development team. And so we oversee all of the adult and youth pipeline programming and events and engagements.
Thinking about the project discussion, we titled it the Power Up Academy, but, maybe a little bit of background of ComEd and who you serve, but then also, what were you seeking and really what was the challenge or the gap that led you to this space?
Yeah, I love the question. Really great way to kick off this conversation. So when ComEd, developed this program, it was many years ago that we thought about what the problem was. So we needed technical talent. We had plenty of job openings, and we know we have job openings in the future, that need this technical talent, and we needed to address how to get them. So a few years ago, ComEd commissioned a job study, and we know that about 150,000 clean energy jobs are coming to Illinois by 2050. So to prepare for this demand, ComEd, we're committed to delivering targeted programs to make sure more local residents, and that's the communities that we serve, are prepared for these good paying jobs created by this clean energy boom. And so workforce development at ComEd is very, well integrated in, what ComEd does. And so we have these pillars that we follow just to make sure that we are targeting the right efforts, and those are to build a skilled talent pipeline, to hire local talent, grow partnerships, and removing barriers. And so that's the work that we seek to do throughout all of our programming and workforce development. And so one thing I love to say, our programs, they're free. And matter of fact, you actually, for many of the programs, you get stipends to make sure, that you are well equipped to take on, coming to our programs. We want to make sure
this is an outside folk kind of
Yes.
looking in or looking around for possibilities. You
Yes.
guys created these programs. Okay, great.
Yes, and so we can't do this without the coordination and collaboration of many folks in our region, from our workforce agencies to our community-based organizations to our corporate partners and sponsors and all of our educational partners. So it is really a big hand that's in this pot, right? Many hands that's in this pot to get our workforce development programming going. And so we're very thankful to all that, participate.
Yeah, and just from my experience, when there was a partnership with the community college where they would, partner for the educators to inform, the new class of linemen. And so I was a technical leader, inside the organization running system planning, and, maybe through the grapevine, people found that I loved to teach. So I ultimately had the privilege to become the professor for that community college to teach the program within the utility that I was working at. And I found like a whole world open up to me. And it was, this workforce development group and the training group, and kind of like, as you just stated, the amount of partnerships and active organizations that are constantly moving. So I guess, you touched upon it, spelling out like you guys are ComEd, the local utility that serves the Lifeline Society. But what are the other kind of groups you mentioned? You rattled off there, but like what are those establishments? And those are external
Yeah,
partnerships, right?
external. Yeah, so first of all, I want to say I'm very thankful to all of our internal partners, our SMEs.
Well, we'll get to them too.
Yes, they come and volunteer, so they are amazing. But yes, when we think about doing our programming, we cannot do them without all of our external partners, and so those are our workforce development agencies. So those are the folks that are in the communities, right? Our community-based organizations, they are there. They know what's happening. They're boots on the ground, and so that's who we partner with. They go find the folks, they recruit them, they're their case managers, and they get them through the program. So can't do any of the work without them. But then we have our corporate partners, and that's the special relationship that I love. So those are the folks that work for ComEd, work on our system. And so they are also employers, right? So they partner in the programs to offer, they're also SMEs, right? And they do various activities for us. So that could be, career fairs, mock interviews, lots of different components that we have written into the curriculum. And so they are critical components of the program. And then we have, our educational institutes, because a lot of our programs, we do offer certifications, which are really critical because we want to make sure that we're giving tangible, stuff for folks to walk away with. So it's not just, coming to the program, but they're walking away with skills, certifications that really are embedded into the core competencies that they've learned.
So what I heard is you said it the first time is volunteer. So these, to make the Power Up Academy work, you ultimately have to tap into the multiple internal organizations, SMEs, to really extract their knowledge base to kind of stand up inside this Power Up Academy. Just thinking about the deployment, the concept, you said did a survey, there's an enormous amount of these jobs coming into your territory. There's this realization of the need to upskill, reskill, and just recruit and inspire new talent in general. So what does that look like, from another thing I'm getting excited about is like just organizational structure. You have a large organization and there's workforce development, reports to a certain sector, but it ultimately becomes a very cross-functional effort.
Yes. Oh, definitely. So, to give you a little bit more color, so this program is a direct pipeline into roles at ComEd and again to some of our corporate partners as well. So for Power Up Academy, what we did was we created an entry-level role in our engineering department. And the key thing about this is it removed the 4-year degree requirement, and through the partnership with our city colleges of Chicago, participants, they actually earn college credit towards a construction or engineering degree. So again, that's that whole wraparound that comes in. We know the wraparound services are critical, right, for workforce development. And so again, they actually, walk away as a college student, which I think is just fabulous because not not many people can think, I'll go to a workforce development program, but actually, end up
Right.
also with college credits, right? And so when we developed this program, we know the barriers exist. And remember, that's one of the core tenets of our ComEd Workforce Development Department. And so our hope was we wanted to strengthen these entry level roles and opportunities. And so, removing that barrier of the college degree, they're able to come to ComEd in that entry level role as a design tech, to be more specific, and that they are able to, learn the skill and then have permanent placement. So it's a temporary placement when they graduate, and then it's permanent after 3 months after testing.
And then that's kind of like through the engineering design realm. Is the Power Up Academy including any like preparing the field employees and or like operators, or is that like a whole separate?
Yeah, we actually have another program. We have tons of programs. So we actually have
Right.
a program that's actually our signature program. We're going into our 14th year. We actually start on January 20th, and that is the Construct Infrastructure Academy. And we have amazing corporate partners there as well. And that I love to say this program gives the lay of the land. So it gives all the, information needed for energy and construction related roles, within ComEd as well as, and then with our corporate partners. And then we have another program, which is called Craft Academy, which starts in March. And that one is specific for our craft roles. And so that's our construction worker and overhead helper. And so that program is designed for the physical assessment. So we try to cover workforce development, the gamut of, needs with all of the roles within ComEd. So the professional and the craft.
So just from like knowing about the, I guess, 14-year-old program, moving and shaking, and then launching the Power Up Committee, Academy, what did you learn, in your team about the people, the culture, and just having organizational readiness? Like thinking about those that may be inspiring to create some type of uplift in their organization or any organization. What can you kind of feel from what you had versus what you needed to create versus where it's headed?
Yeah, so the unique thing, I've been a part of the Construct program all 14 years. I was actually a community-based organization. So that's how I participated in that partnership. And like you, Liz, I love that you said earlier, I was amazed. I was like, what is this? This is magical. From there, I've been on this journey with ComEd in the programming, the workforce development, space. But because of my history with the program, I looked at Construct and I said, okay, we have a lot of different things we can segment to, right? So that's where the Craft Academy, which was only about the physical assessment. So, Construct gives you the full lay of the land, but what I wanted to dig into is like pull some core competencies out and create programs from that we know we needed to dig into more. And so Power Up Academy was, very similar, right? We needed to have more focus on technical talent, a deep focus on technical talent. And so when I think about Power Up Academy, I think about partnership was a core approach, right? We talked to so many people across the organization to get this one going. And it was developed and it's operated with a collaborative of 10 different employers. So I want to make sure I always call them out. And then, of course, our nonprofit partners. And then we have a lot of educational partners for that program. And, the design of all of this was to meet the outcomes again for that technical talent, which we know is so critical, right? And so we had a lot of determining factors that came along with this. So one of the first one is the active employer participation. ComEd can't hire everybody, but we want to make sure that we, approach the program with great partners that will hire, all of our participants. I would say for this program, we stayed with about 10 to 15 participants. We want to make sure that we keep it at a great number where we're able to, hire, all of those folks right across ComEd and with our partners. And so with this active employer participation, we want to ensure the program prepares people for real jobs. So the employers in this program, they sponsor the program to cover costs, teach the technical talent classes, making sure that they're engaged week by week because it's a 14-week program to make sure that they're gaining all the necessary skills. We have an exciting capstone, which changes every year. We have job shadowing. And I will say that 80% of our program graduates are working. Another thing that we looked at was, and we talked about this earlier, was adjusting the hiring practices to ensuring access. Again, removing barriers for any workforce development program is like king. You cannot, you can't think about programming without the removing barriers piece. And so, again, we wanted to make sure that we adjusted those practices to ensure that the program graduates can apply for entry-level roles that were historically required by the college degrees. And, it's been a tremendous success. And then the last thing, and we touched on this again earlier, was that connection to the advancement of, the degree possibilities. And so we wanted to ensure that they walked away with those college credits. And so not only, can they go to the city colleges of Chicago, but they can also transfer to other top local colleges. So I think that's the really big thing that I like to tout. And so one example, can I share an example with you?
Yeah, of course.
Love. Kayla Willer, she is from Chicago. She joined the Power Up Academy. She went into the engineering team. Not only did she, pass her 3-month window, her temporary position, she went to permanent. She actually earned her college degree in engineering, and she also received a promotion. And so she actually has
Love
come
it.
back to the program to teach and inspire. So it's a really full circle moment. We have lots of stories like these, and I could go on and on about them, but it really just shows the power of removing the barrier, getting folks in, and giving them the opportunity to flourish.
I love it. And just, I think another mission of sharing these stories and being on the podcast and kind of pulling some threads, you know, you listed again an enormous amount of work. And so I think there's this space of strategy and developing said concept.
Mhm.
And, I look forward to sharing kind of the bridging of execution. So, to be able to, you had the program and you had a wealth of experience of kind of how to develop, construct, but then you kind of rattled off, and I'm just going to challenge myself to remember, but you first have to identify like your objective and your mission so that you
Mhm.
can craft the language and understand the outreach to your partnered companies. So what I heard is not only is ComEd an employer, but there is 10 to 15 other employers that are kind of part of the program. So you have them vested. So you probably have an individual sitting on some seat.
Yep.
And then you have the development of a curriculum, kind of like what are the key skills that need to be taught? And then what is the curriculum to actually teach that skill, which
Yes.
is another set of minds and beings to come
Mhm.
together to draft, curriculum. And then, you have to get that all more or less vetted, approved, and paid for.
Yes.
And then you can have the best program in the world, but if you can't recruit or let
Yes.
the neighborhoods or the young minds even know about the program,
Mhm.
you're dead in the water. So that's like a whole other uplift,
It
right?
is.
Of how to like market it and communicate
Mhm.
it effectively so you get the 10 or 15. How many participants per
It's generally
cycle?
like 15. 15.
Yeah, so 50, which is, a very impactful and, as you said, magical, right? Like you're in touching people's lives and creating paths that really allow them to, become something that maybe they didn't know existed until the program was
Yes.
created. So I love it. It's a lot of doing that you're, speaking from.
Yes. Well, it's a lot of magic that's happening here, a lot of balls in the air to create, programs like this, but you captured it really well, Liz.
Oh, so thinking, to our listeners and just, a one big space in the grid modernization, and it's kind of an area I've been floating around for 9 years. It was me and my former engineer at my utility. We created like this pie chart, and it was the disciplines of what has come to be. And I will say that pie chart still holds very strong and true. And I remember sharing it with an NETL, like a national laboratory, and they're like, wow, like, what is this? And I'm thinking like, that was kind of what spurred my fire. I was like, wait, like these are the fundamental jobs that need to happen for the grid to stay on. And
Right.
just to have an outside perspective, being like, this is really novel, to me was like a spark, was like, and maybe one of the reasons why the podcast is here today is like that gap in knowledge of what it actually takes to keep the grid up and running is
Mhm.
very large. And I think, creating programs like this and talking about the efforts is really important to, you know, solidify that gap.
Yes.
So thinking about, you have is it Construct, Craft, and Power Up Academy? Is that three
Yes.
that you spoke of? What's up next? Or, you're preparing to launch this new, maybe there's nothing up next, which is fine. But like, where's your headspace, and, how's the success been, and anyone listening, what do you advise to them as you're kind of moving through this space?
Yeah, I love this question. So one thing about how I, oversee workforce development, nothing can be the same. So I'm always pushing my team, what's current, what's, in demand, what's in the future, right? So one thing I'm really proud of, I'm always ideating every year. When we go through the program, so launch is next week, I'll be sitting there with my notepad and I'll think about, okay, does that work still? Or, is this a good idea? Or do I need to bring in a new department that's ideating something that we need to think about, for jobs in the next, few years. So that's something that keeps me up at night. I'm always constantly thinking about what's next, what do we need to add in the curriculum, what's old, what's not working. So that's always top of mind for me. And I think that really goes to evolution is key, right? And so whether it's a current program or developing a new program, is truly thinking about, what's next, what's needed, what are the jobs. So when I always go to the ComEd career page, so who has all the job openings right now? And I try to, talk with recruiting and to understand, where they're going with that. But again, evolution is everything. And so evolving the programs each and every year to make sure that they're meeting the current needs, making sure that they're getting the right certificates. Sometimes I'll pull them back and I say, hey, I don't think we need that anymore, but this one seems to be the best. Let's, elevate this more. For instance, last year we added Habitat for Humanity. So folks will actually get out and do the work. So they will see, the core components of building a home and the energy efficiency concepts, right? So I'm pulling more those things into the program. And again, seeing what works, right? So success is just more than access, right? Access to the jobs is foundational, but the employers, they need the structures to ensure that people thrive. So at ComEd, we've set up mentoring for the graduates that we hire to ensure that they, have the support that they need, right? Alongside our amazing partner, Revolution Workshop, who runs Power Up Academy, they provide, those wraparound services to make sure that, folks are getting everything that that they need. I don't like to, get a person a job and, just drop them off, but it's like the holistic need. They're walking into a new environment. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about, how to support them. I'm just always making sure that I think about the perpetuity. I think that's a big thing for me, perpetuity of,
Love it.
what we're doing and how we're doing it. And the evolution has to always be, in the forefront.
There's so much there that you're unpacking, right? But, what I heard was continuous improvement, right? Like it's not, you don't create a program and then walk off and create, right? There's this continuous flow of adaptation and flexibility. And like that in itself is a job. And then
Yes.
also, which I think we don't educate and inform, especially our high school and college students, that like, you need this
Mhm.
connective fiber to like create community-based organizations to like move forward. I think we get in such these siloed drill functions that then you get in the outside world and you start finding like, oh, this is going to take people. It's going to understand the processes broken or not working, or,
Mhm.
they are what they are. It doesn't mean they can't change and evolve and adapt. So very complex, which is beautiful. And I don't, one thing about AIC is like the authoritative utility voice around operational excellence. So I think the more that we create the awareness of what it means to have continuous improvement, it doesn't mean that what we are today is wrong. It means that, there's a space that's always ever evolving. I
That's
think
right.
another thing, the wraparound programs, which, just share a little bit about like when you say that, other services such
Yes.
as.
Looking at the holistic self, right? Because, you're bringing your skills to work, but you're also bringing yourself, right? Your whole self. And so I'm really big around wraparound services. I think the first one to me that's really key is a financial acumen, right? Folks that come in this program, there is definitely a multiplier to their income, right? They are going from minimum wage to, a very, incredible income, which I'm really proud of, a family sustaining wage, right? And sometimes you need some management. You've never had a 401k, health insurance, the various benefits, right? So that's why the power of our community-based organizations is really key. And so that's in their contract to make sure that they're working with them, not just in the program for a full year, right? So we want to make sure that we're taking care of them. So that is in our contract. So financial acumen, social and emotional learning and intelligence, which is really key, right? Working with others, maybe different stress management. So there's a lot we want to make sure that we're treating the full human experience. And so, getting a job is very life changing. Sometimes that can be overwhelming for folks, right? So we want to make sure that we're addressing all those various components. And then that constant check in that the agencies have with the folks in the program, to me, is something that I'm really proud of, that we're not, just, having a one touch, you graduate and you're gone, but we truly do care about your success. And so those wraparound services are key.
Love it. So for all you listeners trying to create your program, remember that part as well. So I mean, thinking about really your journey in this space that you've been in, and the grid in itself, my full situational awareness from the bulk generation to the customer edge is the space that we're actively evolving within the utility. And I think external stakeholders tend to seek or think that there's an expectation that the utilities should be able to do a lot of what is being required, but there's this evolution happening in regards to integrating and implementing an enormous amount of technologies that have never yet been tapped.
Mhm.
So it's just a continuous space of improvement. And the more that we can talk about what those fundamentals are, the important, but at the crux of it, and almost every conversation we have, workforce development pops up.
It's
So
there.
just to all you folk out there is like, is this grid mod? I mean, it is kind of, you think about the foundational pyramid, that ability to have the people and the right skill and understanding that there's a continuous involvement and improvement processes to unlock is a big part of it. So I love that, this is this space that we're talking about. So I guess just for our listeners and just from your experience, make it personal, whatever, what's, a lesson or kind of something that you would like to share just to kind of empower any of us change champions, needing the energy to keep on going.
Yeah, I would say look for the talent that's in your backyard. It may not, look the way that it used to look, 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even yesterday, right? we're, in a different society, right? People are showing up and learning and have skills that can be transferable in so many ways. And I think it's really about being open minded. Community based organizations, those workforce agencies, they're key. There's talent there in the neighborhoods, in the communities that you serve. So, looking for those partnerships, really getting engaged, the grassroots, the ground floor, you know, gets us being out there, seeking that talent is, really rewarding. Like I said, it's something that I'm a true champion for, just making sure that we're opening up this space. We work in various communities through Northern Illinois and making sure that those people in those communities know about the fabulous jobs and careers that ComEd has. And so, continuing to, push that narrative to partner and to make sure that we are, bringing folks along is key.
Right. And, I can't get away from being able to communicate and market effectively, these
Yes.
types of efforts. I've said this many times, but I've read it maybe 9 years ago. Us humans hear something 7 times till maybe we activate our active listening skills. So, the idea that, you got to keep pounding that drum is really important.
Mhm.
Well, Laticia, thank you for sharing this work and for the leadership behind it. The projects like Power Up Academy remind us that the grid mod depends on the people. And workforce development is not really a side effort, it is core to really long-term
Yes, you are.
success.
Yes.
So, to our listeners, I encourage you to think about how learning and development shows up within your own organization, within your own self, and see if there's maybe opportunities for you to invest because it seems that these programs do need volunteer SME time. So, thank you again for joining and sharing today.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.